Nav Klibberhai, friends. Darth Momo here. So, Star Wars The Clone Wars is one of Lucasfilm's most popular series, and beloved by a lot of people. But I think given recent events, it's quite possible it never would have ran as long as it did if it came out today. Recently, The Acolyte was cancelled, and we got some information as to why. It's pretty much bad viewership and bad reviews. The Acolyte was initially pitched as a multi-season show, and while yes, I do highly prefer Clone Wars to Acolyte, I think it's possible The Acolyte could have gotten better with time. But now we'll never know. And while many of these Star Wars fans celebrate its cancellation, many of these same fans would also praise The Clone Wars. But it's interesting to think about what would happen if we applied the same standards. Acolyte started out with about 488 million watch minutes. You move on to the third episode and it's down to about 370. That's roughly 25% less. Out of all the live action shows with its premieres, it was the lowest, except for Andor. And reports would suggest that it only continued to plummet after episode 3. But what happens when we look at the Clone Wars? We start out here with a pretty strong about 4 million viewers on its premiere. That's not bad, that's pretty good. And what happens when we come back the next week? We're down to 2.8, which is, again, about a 25% loss, just like The Acolyte. And it continues to drop as we go on throughout Season 1, and its initial viewership doesn't really stabilize until, or doesn't really bounce back until we get to the finale. We see here the finale came close. But otherwise, if you look at the rest, I mean, we dropped down as low as about 2 million, which would be about half. The viewership stabilized a little bit as we continued on with the show, but even then, we're only getting about 60% of its initial views. We see as time goes on with the series, we hold around the 2 million, we continue to trend and dip down into a little under 2 million, and about 1.75 is the average as we go on throughout the show. And when you get to renewal options, this isn't data that's good to look at. But what about reviews? We all know about the infamous Acolyte review bombing and the low reviews as far as viewership and all that. But let's go to Star Wars The Clone Wars. While yes, later seasons were critically acclaimed, this is where Season 1 currently sits at Rotten Tomatoes. That's as of today. Which, that's not too bad, although I would remind you that critically, The Acolyte got better reviews than Rotten Tomatoes. But I know a lot of Star Wars fans have cried foul play about the critics. So, let's go on. Let's check out, individual episodes. We see some high 7s, some 6s. Looks like we're averaging about, a very flat on 6. We're averaging maybe about a 7 on these. But again, this is with hindsight, 15 years of hindsight. Let's look for a more contemporary review. When we look at, let's see, this rating right here, that was as of 2021, we're looking at an average rating of 5.7 out of 10 for Season 1. When we look over at what The Acolyte got per average episode, 5.3, 5.1, 3.7, we got a 6.5. It's averaging about a 5 for an episode, which isn't too far behind what Clone Wars did in Season 1. It's also important, too, to keep in mind budget and finances. Acolyte had the infamous $180 million budget. Everybody knows about that, right? Which, per this article I was looking at, it did the math, and that's about $630,000 per minute of screen time. That's a lot. Yeah, live action will always generally be higher than animation. This is true. But that's still a very high budget. But so is Clone Wars. Around that time, an average animated show that the target demographic of Clone Wars had was at most maybe about 500,000, probably a little less per episode. Clone Wars had a budget of $1 million an episode. I do remember seeing it advertised on StarWars.com, especially around Season 6, that they were blowing their budget towards the top episodes with capes. That's part of why they gave Dooku a new costume. And it's also important to remember, too, that overall the show wasn't making money. It had George to kind of pay it out and line the pockets, which, of course, George made and owned Star Wars. He got merchandising rights. George has the money to do that. It wasn't much of a hindrance for him, but as viewership tanked and budget only went up as the show went on, the show was spending more than it was making, and that's one of several reasons why Disney pulled the plug when they acquired the franchise. And look, I'm not saying these situations are the exact same. I do think Clone Wars had more going for it than Acolyte. I do prefer Clone Wars to Acolyte. But at the same time, that's because it had Daddy George's money, and he was pretty much making this as a passion project. Money was irrelevant to him. This was something he wanted to do. Acolyte, like all the other Star Wars shows, is under a corporation that's got metrics to meet. So go ahead and praise the fact that low viewership and bad reviews got the show canceled. Because if we held the same standards across the board, and Clone Wars didn't have George's money to back it up, it too most likely would have hit the chopping block and not made it past the first season. If it came out today, of course. Just food for thought. Otherwise, thank you guys for joining in. Darth Momo out, and may the Force be with you. Always.
Thanks for watching. Please subscribe to the channel. If you liked the video, comment down below and hit that like button. Oh, and check out some of my other videos. I'm sure you'll find them a delight.